This is the second in a series of videos, companion videos to the technology instruction, entering and saving data that we handed out in class. In this video, we'll look at creating vectors, which we actually did in the previous video as well. We'll assign the vectors to named objects, but we'll focus on some of the operations that we can do on those vectors. Here's the script that we had started to build last time. I'm going to edit my script here because I'm really not interested in knowing what 3 plus 7 is. I'm going to build a second vector. Let's have it be 1. Notice anything that I do up here, nothing happens. This is just a text editor. But at any particular time I can come over here and run the code and it will run all of the operations that I've got listed here. So let's look at them. At this point, we've told it to build an object X, which is going to be a vector containing those 5 elements, create a vector Y, and then show us what X is, and then create a vector Y that contains another 5 elements. So I put the cursor right here behind Y, and so now we create the vector X, we show what X is, there R is showing us what X is, then we create the vector Y, and we show what Y is there. Look, remember we learned that command ls in the last video that shows us now that we've got 2 objects that have been created here. I'd like to study those objects. Here are some commands that are useful. We can look at the length of X, and it tells us that it has a length of 5. We can look at the length of Y, and it's also the same length, a length of 5. There we can look at this, just for our reference here, let me show what X is. And then I could ask what the sum of X is. It can add up those values. We could take X squared, and notice that it squares each element. 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, minus 2 squared is positive 4, 7 squared is 49, and 6 squared is 36. So we can do a couple of important commands. We could look at the sum of all the x squareds, a command that we will often do in statistics when we have a particular sample and we need to find the sum of all the x squareds. We could also find the sum, the sum of all the x's, and then we could square that. Okay, in the handout we look at the summation notation that's used for doing those kinds of things. Now, because we can find the length, which is 5, and because we can find the sum, we could actually find the average. So what we usually call the average is called the arithmetic average, or the mean is what statisticians call it. Let's calculate the sum of x divided by the length of x. So it's going to add up all of the x values in the vector x, and then it's going to divide by how many elements are there. And so, it assigned it to the variable average. So let's just look and see what average is. Okay, now I might like to have those commands. And so with my cursor here right after that last command, I could ask it to run this entire script again by just running the code. Now, you might suspect that there actually is a command in R that calculates the average. It's actually called mean. Mean of x adds up all of those. It's a built-in command already. I've added a couple more lines here of things that we've looked at in this particular video. Again, we can run the code and it does all of those things. It builds x, shows us what x is, it builds y, shows us what y is, calculates that average in that way. Now here I've started to add some annotation, some documentation to the things that I'm doing in the script. Whenever R sees the pound sign, it ignores the rest of that line. So that allows us to write comments to remind us what's going on here. So I've gone through and annotated what's happening here. I create the vector, I show the vector, I create another vector, I show the vector. Here we were calculating the mean, the arithmetic mean, or what we often call the average, and then I'm going to add documentation to the rest of these commands. This is useful because when we come back and look at this script later on, I've got these notes that remind me what was happening. When you feel that a command line is going to be obvious to yourself or to whoever the reader is, sometimes I'll ask you to actually send in an assignment that shows the commands that you use to produce a particular result. So right on this line, it's going to be obvious to you and I that we're just asking R to show us what that variable is that we've. And because this is just a text editor up here, you can just move your cursor wherever you want to. You can put in one of these pound comments at the end. You can put annotations in here. You can show what they're doing down here by just running the code. In this video, we looked at, reminded ourselves how to create vectors, some of the operations that we can do on the vectors. Some of the key functions that we used and applied to vectors was the C function to actually create a vector, the length function, which actually tells how many elements are in the vector, the sum vector, which just adds the elements of the vector, and the mean, which calculates what we usually have called the average. It adds up all the elements in the vector and divides by how many elements there are in that vector. Okay, check out the next video in the series.